long before roads were drawn upon maps, before borders hardened into lines, and before empires learned to measure the reach of their authority across mountains and deserts, there existed something quieter than conquest. The greatest connections between distant civilizations were not built solely by armies carrying banners into foreign lands, nor by kings proclaiming their victories beneath towering palace walls. Instead, they emerged patiently, almost imperceptibly, through the steady footsteps of merchants, the faithful endurance of pack animals, the enduring shape of valleys and mountain passes, and the gentle exchange of stories carried farther than any single traveler could ever hope to wander. Geography offered possibilities, curiosity provided direction, and countless ordinary people, whose names have long faded into silence, slowly stitched together continents with thread, conversation, and trust. The Silk Road, remembered today as one of history's greatest networks of exchange, was never a single road. It was a living current that gathered strength over centuries, flowing through deserts, across rivers, over snow-covered mountains, and into the marketplaces where strangers gradually ceased to be strangers. Our journey begins during the 2nd century before the Common Era, when the Han Dynasty governed a vast and growing empire from its magnificent capital of Chang'an, protected by imposing walls and organized through an increasingly sophisticated administration. Han China enjoyed remarkable agricultural prosperity, expanding craftsmanship and flourishing scholarship. Yet even an empire of such remarkable stability faced persistent uncertainty. Beyond its northern frontiers, across the wide grasslands, stretched the domain of the Xiongnu, powerful confederations of mounted nomadic peoples, whose swift horses and remarkable mobility allowed them to appear unexpectedly along the empire's borders before vanishing once again into the endless horizon of the steppe. For Emperor Wu of Han, whose reign would become one of the longest and most influential in Chinese history, the northern threat demanded more than stronger walls or larger armies. Victory, he believed, might also come through diplomacy, through distant alliances, and through knowledge of lands that remained almost entirely unknown to the imperial court. Information itself could become a powerful instrument of security. And so the emperor conceived a mission unlike any previously attempted by the Han state. In the year 138 BCE, a young imperial envoy named Zhang Qian departed Chang'an with a small delegation. His destination lay somewhere beyond the familiar borders of China, beyond deserts scarcely described, beyond towering mountain ranges, toward peoples whose languages, customs, and kingdoms were little more than fragments of rumor. His purpose was to seek the Yuezhi, a people who had themselves been displaced westward by the expansion of the Xiongnu. The emperor hoped they might become valuable allies against this common adversary. The journey began with determination, yet history rarely grants easy passage to those who travel into the unknown. Before Zhang Qian could reach his intended destination, he and many of his companions were captured by the Xiongnu. Years passed in captivity, seasons arrived with quiet regularity, bringing cold winds across the grasslands, gentle springs, warm summers, and the fading light of autumn, while the envoy remained far from the court that had entrusted him with his mission. More than a decade slipped by with remarkable patience. Yet, despite the passing years, Jian never entirely abandoned the purpose that had first carried him westward. Eventually, through persistence, careful planning, and perhaps a measure of fortune, he escaped. Rather than returning immediately to China, he continued toward the distant lands he had originally been sent to discover. There, he encountered kingdoms unlike those known in the Han world. Prosperous oasis cities sustained by irrigation, flourishing markets filled with unfamiliar goods, and peoples connected through networks extending farther west toward Central Asia and beyond. Among the many observations that captured the imagination of Emperor Wu were reports of extraordinary horses raised in the fertile Fergana Valley, strong, swift, and seemingly tireless. These magnificent animals would later become celebrated in Chinese tradition as the heavenly horses. They represented not merely military strength, but also proved that sophisticated civilizations existed far beyond the mountains that had once appeared to mark the edge of the known world. When Zhongqian finally returned to Chang'an after roughly 13 years away, only a handful of those who had originally departed remained beside him. Yet, he carried something infinitely more valuable than treasure. He returned with knowledge. His descriptions transformed distant rumors into tangible geography. Unknown kingdoms acquired names. Trade possibilities became visible. Political opportunities expanded. The western horizon, once obscured by uncertainty, gradually revealed itself as a landscape filled not only with risks, but also with remarkable promise. The emperor listened carefully. Court officials copied reports onto bamboo slips. Maps were reconsidered. Diplomatic missions multiplied. Merchants, whose instincts often sensed opportunity before governments recognized it fully, began preparing for journeys that would gradually extend farther than any previous generation had imagined. No single proclamation declared the birth of the Silk Road. Instead, it emerged quietly through hundreds of individual decisions, each one as ordinary as loading a bundle onto a waiting camel. As evening descended over Chang'an, the great city slowly surrendered its daytime energy. The final conversations echoed through narrow market streets before fading into softer voices. Massive wooden gates, reinforced with iron fittings darkened by years of use, began to close with slow, deliberate certainty. Guards took their positions upon the walls while lanterns cast warm circles of golden light across stone pavements that had carried countless footsteps. Beyond those gates, one caravan made its final preparations beneath the gathering dusk. Bactrian camels, with their thick coats and patient expressions, shifted their weight almost imperceptibly as experienced handlers adjusted ropes securing precious cargo. Bundles of carefully rolled silk rested beside tightly wrapped packages of loose tea leaves, their delicate fragrance drifting gently into the cooling evening air. Small wooden chests contained lacquerware, polished bronze mirrors, finely crafted textiles, and other carefully protected goods destined for markets that none the younger travelers had ever seen. One by one, the camels began to move. Bronze bells, suspended from leather harnesses, answered each measured step with soft, unhurried chimes that blended naturally into the surrounding silence. Heavy hooves pressed steadily into the sandy earth beyond the cultivated fields, producing a quiet rhythm that neither hurried nor hesitated. Above them stretched an immense sky whose colors slowly dissolved, from pale blue into violet, and finally into the deep velvet of approaching night. Days passed with remarkable consistency. Dawn arrived gently across endless plains. Midday sunlight shimmered above distant dunes. Evening brought welcome relief from the heat as the caravan continued its patient progress toward the western horizon. Every traveler gradually surrendered to the dependable rhythm established by the camels themselves, creatures perfectly adapted to landscapes where haste offered no advantage and endurance became the greatest companion. At last, as darkness settled completely across the desert, the caravan reached a quiet oasis sheltered beneath clusters of dark palms whose leaves barely stirred in the cooling breeze. Clear water reflected the first, brilliant stars appearing overhead, while the camels folded themselves carefully onto the soft ground, resting after another long day's journey. Nearby, merchants gathered around a modest campfire, whose gentle flames illuminated weathered faces and tired but peaceful smiles. Their conversations remained quiet, sharing memories of distant homes, discussing tomorrow's path, exchanging stories gathered from travelers met along forgotten roads. Gradually, even those voices faded. The fire settled into glowing embers. The camels rested peacefully beneath the palms. Above them, the countless stars stretched from one horizon to the other, silent witnesses to journeys that would continue for centuries. Across the vast desert, an immense stillness slowly unfolded, embracing every traveler, every grain of sand, and every dream carried westward upon the patient rhythm of the caravan. The caravan departed the familiar lowlands with the same patient rhythm that had carried it across the broad deserts. Yet the world before it was beginning to change, almost imperceptibly. The endless horizons gradually narrowed into valleys shaped by rivers that had carved their quiet paths through stone. For countless ages, the air became clearer with every passing day, carrying fewer scents of distant vegetation and more of bare rock, melting snow, and cold water tumbling over ancient cliffs. The earth itself seemed to rise gently beneath every careful footstep, inviting the travelers upward, not through sudden ascent, but through a long and measured climb that demanded endurance rather than speed. The Silk Road had never been a single road stretching across one landscape. It was a living network that patiently adapted itself to mountains as naturally as it crossed deserts, and now it guided merchants toward one of its most magnificent and demanding regions. Ahead stood the great mountain systems of Central Asia, where the Tian Shan reached, across the northern horizon, while the immense Pamir mountains rose even higher beyond them, earning through countless generations the enduring name of the roof of the world. Here, the familiar comforts of broad plains disappeared, behind walls of stone that seemed to touch the heavens themselves. Peaks crowned with snow reflected the changing light from dawn until dusk. They are glaciers preserving winters that never entirely departed, even while valleys below briefly welcomed the warmth of summer. These mountain corridors were far more than obstacles between east and west. They formed strategic gateways linking civilizations, separated by thousands of kilometers. And throughout antiquity, they were watched carefully by local mountain kingdoms whose prosperity depended upon the steady movement of caravans. Small fortresses overlooked narrow passes, where only a handful of travelers could move at one time. Their stone towers stood quietly above winding trails, protecting merchants from raiders who occasionally sought to exploit the isolation of these high routes. The rulers of these valleys understood that every successful caravan strengthened not only distant empires, but also their own communities, whose markets flourished whenever trade continued without interruption. The ascent continued gradually, one patient day flowing into another. The familiar rhythm established by the camels never changed, although every breath now carried visible traces of the growing altitude. Warm air left their nostrils in gentle white clouds, before dissolving almost immediately into the crisp mountain atmosphere. The animals lowered their heads slightly as they climbed, conserving their strength with the calm wisdom that countless generations had refined across deserts and mountains alike. Their bronze bells still chimed softly with every deliberate step, yet even those gentle sounds seemed quieter here, absorbed by vast distances and immense walls of stone. The travelers also felt the mountain world changing around them. Conversations became less frequent, not because of fear, but because the thin air encouraged silence. Every word carried farther in the clear atmosphere, lingering briefly before fading into remarkable stillness. The crunch of frozen earth beneath leather boots became one of the day's constant companions, joined only by the slow breathing of the animals and the occasional whisper of wind descending from snow-covered ridges high above. As the caravan climbed ever higher, the valleys widened unexpectedly before narrowing once again, revealing alpine meadows where hardy grasses swayed gently beneath brilliant skies. Small streams, fed by distant glaciers, crossed the trail with water so clear that every rounded stone beneath the surface could be counted without effort. Shepherds occasionally appeared in the distance, tending flocks adapted to these remarkable elevations, offering respectful greetings before quietly continuing their own timeless routines. Among the mountains, when evening approached, the landscape entered another kind of beauty entirely. Shadows stretched slowly across the valleys, while the final sunlight lingered upon the highest summits, long after darkness had settled below. Then, as the moon gradually rose above the eastern ridges, the mountains seemed transformed into another world altogether. Cold silver light spread across immense glaciers that shimmered with quiet brilliance, illuminating snowfields that had endured through centuries beyond memory. At such elevations, silence possessed a remarkable depth. It was not simply the absence of sound, but the presence of something vast and immeasurably peaceful. Even the wind paused at intervals, leaving the travelers surrounded by a stillness so complete that they could hear only the gentle shifting of wool garments, the quiet movement of camel harnesses, and their own slow breathing beneath the brilliant canopy of stars. Above them stretched a sky of extraordinary clarity, where countless constellations shone with a steady light, rarely witnessed in the lower lands. The heavens appeared astonishingly close, as though one more careful step might carry the caravan into the stars themselves. Yet these magnificent heights demanded respect as much as admiration. Temperatures fell rapidly after sunset, and frost gradually settled upon every exposed surface. Fingers stiffened despite thick gloves. The camels' coats gathered tiny crystals of ice that sparkled beneath the moonlight before, quietly melting near the warmth of their bodies. The travelers wrapped heavy wool cloaks more tightly around their shoulders, continuing forward with patient determination toward the shelter they knew awaited somewhere beyond the next ridge. At last, emerging from the growing darkness, the caravan saw the reassuring outline of an ancient caravanserai built directly into the mountainside. Massive walls of carefully fitted stone rose from the ridge itself, appearing less like a building than a natural extension of the mountain. Its entrance stood protected by heavy wooden gates strengthened with iron bands, polished smooth through generations of passing hands. A single lantern burned steadily above the doorway, offering a warm point of light against the immense darkness surrounding it. One by one, the camels entered the sheltered courtyard where attendants quietly relieved them of their carefully balanced loads. The thick stone walls immediately softened the fierce mountain wind, replacing its sharp howl with a welcome silence broken only by the gentle crackling of fire from within. The transition felt almost miraculous. Only moments earlier, the travelers had stood beneath endless skies and freezing air, while now they found themselves embraced by warmth, accumulated within ancient stone that had sheltered countless caravans over countless winters. Inside, a great central hearth burned with patient strength. Thick logs settled slowly into glowing embers, while bright flames danced upward, filling the hall with comforting light that reflected softly from smoke-darkened beams overhead. The fragrance of boiling mountain herbs drifted gently through the room, mingling with the rich aroma of freshly baked flatbread warming beside the fire. Simple meals were prepared without haste, their nourishing warmth welcomed after the long ascent through frozen valleys. The merchants removed heavy cloaks, still carrying traces of mountain frost, and gathered quietly near the hearth, There was little need for conversation. Shared exhaustion created its own understanding, deeper than words could easily express. Cups of steaming herbal broth passed patiently from hand to hand, while weary faces gradually relaxed in the comforting glow of the fire. Outside, unnoticed by many already resting, delicate snowflakes began to descend through the silent mountain night, settling gently upon the caravanserai's ancient roof and covering the winding paths the travelers had climbed only hours before. Soon, thick wool blankets surrounded each sleeping figure, preserving precious warmth against the cold that continued beyond the stone walls. The fire settled into a deep orange glow, its steady crackling becoming a gentle companion to sleep. Beyond the fortress, the snowstorm quietly gathered, strength across the high passes of the Pamirs and the Tian Shan. But within those enduring walls, the travelers rested in complete safety, while the mountains themselves stood silent beneath the stars, faithfully watching over another peaceful night along the ancient Silk Road. Morning arrived gently upon the high mountain passes, where the first rays of sunlight slowly touched the snow-covered summits before descending into the sheltered valleys below. The caravan emerged quietly from the stone caravanserai that had protected it through the long winter night, leaving behind the comforting warmth of its ancient walls and returning once more to the patient rhythm of the Silk Road. The camels accepted their carefully balanced loads. Without haste, their familiar bronze bells awakening with soft, measured chimes that echoed briefly among the cliffs before dissolving into the clear mountain air. Ahead, the road no longer climbed toward distant glaciers. Instead, it began a long and graceful descent toward warmer lands, where rivers valley nourished fertile plains, and some of the greatest cities of the ancient world patiently awaited every traveler who followed these enduring routes. With every passing day, the mountains gradually loosened their hold upon the landscape. Sharp ridges softened into rounded hills, while icy streams gathered together into larger rivers flowing steadily toward the broad heart of Central Asia. The crisp, thin air slowly gave way to a gentler atmosphere, carrying hints of fertile soil and growing orchards. Small villages appeared more frequently along the valleys, their cultivated fields stretching beside canals that reflected the quiet movement of the sky. It was a gradual transformation, almost unnoticed from one hour to the next, yet deeply comforting in its steady rhythm, as though the earth itself were guiding the weary travelers from the stern majesty of stone into a landscape shaped by water, harvests, and peaceful human settlement. Beyond the final foothills lay the historic region that later generations would know as Transoxiana, the rich lands embraced by the great rivers Amu Darya and Sur Darya. For countless centuries, these waterways nourished fertile oases that flourished like green islands surrounded by broad expanses of steppe and desert. Here, the Silk Road found one of its most vibrant hearts, where routes from the east and west, from India to the south, and the Mediterranean to the far west, met in remarkable harmony. Wealthy local rulers understood that prosperity depended not upon isolation, but upon welcoming those who arrived with peaceful intentions. Merchants, scholars, astronomers, physicians, artists, and diplomats all found protection within these flourishing cities, where knowledge traveled as faithfully as silk or precious stones. Among these celebrated centers, few names inspired greater admiration than Samarkand and Bukhara. Long before their magnificent monuments became symbols of Central Asian civilization, these cities had already earned lasting reputations as places where distant worlds met. Without haste, a traveler arriving from China might encounter Persian merchants displaying finely woven carpets beside Indian traders carrying fragrant spices, while visitors from lands bordering the Mediterranean exchanged glassware, silverwork, and carefully written manuscripts. Languages mingled naturally beneath shaded marketplaces, and ideas passed from one conversation to another with remarkable ease. Philosophical traditions found attentive listeners. Astronomical observations were compared beneath clear desert skies, and artistic techniques quietly crossed continents alongside the caravans themselves. As evening approached, after many days of steady travel, the caravan finally caught its first glimpse of Samarkand, rising gently above the surrounding orchards. The descending sun bathed the city in warm golden light, while magnificent domes, adorned with brilliant turquoise and deep blue glazed tiles, reflected the final colors of the day. Their curved surfaces seemed almost to gather the fading sunlight before releasing it softly into the growing dusk. Tall gateways framed the streets beyond, their intricate geometric patterns revealing generations of master craftsmen whose patient work had transformed ordinary brick into enduring beauty. The caravan entered the city at the peaceful hour when the day's busiest trading had already drawn to its close. Market stalls stood neatly arranged beneath quiet arcades, their owners gradually preparing for the evening, while the lingering fragrances of the day remained suspended in the warm oasis air. Sweet dried apricots, figs, raisins, almonds, and pistachios still filled woven baskets, waiting for tomorrow's visitors. The earthy scent of sun-baked clay drifted gently from nearby. Workshops where potters had shaped elegant vessels throughout the afternoon. Cumin, coriander, saffron, and other treasured spices lingered softly above the stone streets, mingling with delicate notes of rosewater carried from shaded courtyards where flowering gardens quietly welcomed the cooling evening. Most soothing of all was the constant presence of water. After the frozen silence of the mountains and the dry winds of the desert, its gentle movement offered profound comfort. Throughout the city, carefully designed house, broad pools and fountains placed within courtyards and public squares reflected the first stars of evening, while their steady trickling softened every surrounding sound. The quiet flow of water had long been treasured throughout Central Asia, where every spring and canal represented life itself. Its patient voice accompanied conversations, cooled the evening air, and reminded every traveler that careful stewardship of nature had allowed these remarkable cities to flourish in lands surrounded by arid horizons. The caravan continued through broad streets lined with graceful brick buildings whose arches framed cool passageways leading toward shaded inner courtyards. Lanterns gradually awakened one by one beneath the arcades, casting warm circles of light across carefully laid stone pavements, polished smooth by generations of passing feet. There was no sense of urgency within the city. Instead, an atmosphere of settled confidence seemed to embrace every visitor, as though centuries of peaceful exchange had taught the streets themselves the value of patience. Before long, the travelers reached one of the city's grand caravanserais, an impressive sanctuary designed specifically for those who had crossed immense distances. Massive wooden gates opened into a spacious courtyard, surrounded by elegant two-story brick galleries. Every surface reflected thoughtful craftsmanship. Delicate geometric patterns decorated walls and archways with remarkable precision, while carved wooden balconies overlooked the quiet, central space where weary animals and equally weary travelers could finally rest. The camels were gently relieved of their burdens and guided beneath wide stone arches where fresh water and carefully prepared fodder awaited them. Their bronze bells gradually fell silent as they folded themselves comfortably upon the ground, settling into peaceful stillness after weeks of steady travel. Nearby, attendants carefully stored bales of silk, crates of tea, spices, precious metals, and countless other goods, whose journeys would continue. After only a brief pause, within these protective walls, as darkness deepened, the courtyard became wonderfully serene. The moon climbed slowly above the rooftops, illuminating the elegant symmetry of the surrounding architecture. The pale light emphasized every graceful arch and every carefully arranged pattern of brickwork, revealing beauty that seemed almost timeless beneath the stars. From distant corners of the courtyard came the soft murmur of conversations, spoken in many languages: Chinese, Persian, Sogdian, Indian, and other voices blended together, not in confusion, but in quiet harmony, each carrying fragments of distant homes and shared journeys. Gradually, even these gentle exchanges faded, one after another, until only the quiet fountain continued its patient song beneath the moonlight. Within the cool, high-ceilinged rooms surrounding the courtyard, thick walls preserved the refreshing calm gathered during the night. Soft silk rugs covered the floors, while woven blankets offered welcome comfort after many days upon the road. The travelers settled into deep and effortless rest, knowing that for one peaceful night there was no mountain pass to cross, no desert wind to endure, and no uncertainty waiting beyond the next horizon. Outside, the fountain continued its steady splashing beneath the silent stars. The camels rested peacefully beneath ancient arches, and the great oasis city, whose heart had welcomed generations, of travelers from every corner of the known world, slowly surrendered itself to another tranquil night along the eternal Silk Road. The caravan departed the welcoming courtyards of Samarkand and Bukhara with the same quiet patience that had carried it across mountains and fertile valleys, following the ancient roads that gradually turned once more toward wider horizons. Behind them remained the cool fountains, the blue domes, and the peaceful marketplaces, where languages from every corner of the known world had blended into gentle conversation. Ahead lay another landscape that had shaped the history of the Silk Road just as profoundly, though in an entirely different way. The fertile fields slowly gave way to open plains. The plains yielded to stretches of dry earth, and, almost without notice, the travelers entered the vast trade sphere of ancient Persia, where caravans continued their steady passage through some of the most beautiful and demanding deserts on Earth. Across many centuries, these routes passed through territories governed by powerful Persian kingdoms and later by the Parthian and Sasanian empires, whose rulers understood the remarkable value of the roads connecting east and west. Merchants traveling from China toward the Mediterranean rarely completed the entire journey alone. Instead, goods, ideas, and knowledge passed gradually from one caravan to another, moving patiently across generations of traders who knew every valley, every oasis, and every reliable source of water hidden within the immense deserts. The Silk Road was not only a road of commerce, but also a chain of trust maintained through careful hospitality, practical engineering, and the quiet cooperation of communities separated by extraordinary distances. Among the greatest achievements of Persian civilization were the ingenious qanats, underground channels patiently carved through earth and stone, carrying precious water from distant mountain aquifers into villages, gardens, orchards, and isolated desert settlements. Hidden beneath the surface, protected from the fierce sun, these remarkable waterways allowed life to flourish where the landscape itself seemed almost unwilling to offer it. To a passing caravan, a small grove of trees or a quiet settlement rising unexpectedly from the empty horizon often owed its existence to these unseen rivers flowing silently beneath the ground. The travelers rarely saw the channels themselves, yet they understood that beneath the still desert lay a hidden network every bit as extraordinary as the roads above it. The land stretched farther with every passing day. The caravan entered the great deserts that would later be known as the Dasht-e-Kavir, where immense plains of salt and rolling dunes seemed to continue beyond the reach of vision. During daylight, the sun climbed high above an almost cloudless sky, pouring warmth steadily across the earth until the sand shimmered like quiet waves upon a distant sea. The travelers adjusted naturally to the rhythm demanded by the desert. They rose before dawn, rested during the hottest hours whenever possible, and welcomed the slow arrival of evening with deep gratitude born from long experience. There was no haste in the movement of the camels. Their broad feet settled softly upon the sand before rising once, again with effortless regularity, creating a gentle rocking motion that gradually became the heartbeat of the journey itself, hour after hour, step after step. The entire caravan surrendered to that timeless rhythm. Bronze bells hanging from worn leather harnesses answered every movement with quiet, measured chimes that repeated so consistently. They seemed almost to merge with breathing itself. The sound neither demanded attention nor disappeared entirely. It simply remained, accompanying every mile with unwavering patience. As afternoon slowly surrendered its brilliance, the desert performed one of its oldest and most comforting transformations. The fierce warmth that had rested upon the earth throughout the day began to dissolve almost imperceptibly. A cool breeze emerged from distant horizons, carrying with it the dry fragrance of sand and ancient stone. The travelers loosened their robes slightly, breathing more deeply as the refreshing air replaced the lingering heat. Shadows lengthened across the dunes until every ridge acquired gentle curves, softened by fading light. Soon, the moon rose above the eastern horizon with remarkable clarity. Its pale silver light spread quietly across the desert, touching each dune with delicate precision until the entire landscape resembled a vast frozen ocean whose waves had been suspended in perfect stillness. Every crest glowed softly, while the valleys between them rested in deep blue shadow. Nothing hurried within that immense wilderness. Even the wind moved with extraordinary restraint, lifting only the finest grains of sand before allowing them to settle once again with barely audible whispers. The caravan continued beneath this luminous sky, where the stars appeared almost limitless in their number, without mountains or forests to interrupt the horizon. The heavens stretched unbroken in every direction. Ancient travelers often relied upon these familiar constellations as faithful companions, guiding them across landscapes where few permanent landmarks existed. Above them, the stars followed their eternal courses with calm certainty, while below the caravan answered, with its own equally steady procession across the moonlit sands. Only a handful of sounds disturbed the remarkable silence. Heavy camel hooves pressed gently into the cooling earth with soft, muffled rhythms that blended naturally into the surrounding stillness. Occasionally, a saddle shifted with a quiet creak, or a loose rope brushed lightly against folded cargo. The bronze bells continued their patient music, each clear note drifting across the open desert before fading gently into the night. It was a silence not empty of life, but full of peaceful continuity, where every sound found its proper place within the vastness surrounding it. Hours passed almost unnoticed until, nestled between sheltering dunes, a solitary caravanserai gradually appeared beneath the moonlight. Built from sun-dried mud brick, whose warm colors had blended almost perfectly with the surrounding desert, the ancient outpost seemed less like a building than a natural extension of the earth itself. Thick outer walls protected a quiet courtyard from wandering winds, while a modest wooden gate stood open to welcome every peaceful traveler who arrived beneath the stars. The camels entered slowly, relieved at last from another day's long journey. One by one, they folded themselves comfortably upon the packed earth of the courtyard, settling close together in familiar companionship. Their slow breathing soon fell into remarkable harmony, deep and steady, rising gently through the cool night air, like quiet waves upon an unseen shore. The scent of the desert changed as darkness deepened. Warm sand gradually released the heat it had gathered throughout the day, while dry earth cooled beneath the moonlight, filling the courtyard with a subtle fragrance both clean and ancient. Near the center of the enclosure, the merchants gathered around a small fire, built from desert brushwood, carefully collected along the route. Its modest flames never rose high, yet glowing embers cast a gentle amber light across weathered faces and well-worn travel cloaks. Few words were needed after such a long day. Some travelers simply watched the slow pulse of the coals as sparks occasionally drifted upward before disappearing into the immeasurable darkness overhead. Others quietly sipped warm herbal infusions, allowing the silence itself to become their greatest comfort. Gradually, the fire settled lower, its bright flames yielding to deep crimson embers that glowed softly beneath a fine layer of ash. One after another, the travelers withdrew into the cool mud brick rooms surrounding the courtyard, where thick walls preserved the pleasant freshness of the desert night. Wrapped in wool blankets and resting upon simple woven rugs, they surrendered easily to profound, dreamless sleep. Outside, the camels continued breathing peacefully together beneath the moonlit sky, while beyond the sheltering walls, the endless dunes rested in complete stillness, watched over by an immense canopy of silent stars that had guided caravans across the Persian deserts for countless generations. Along the eternal Silk Road, the long road that had begun beyond the eastern walls of Chang'an, now entered its final and gentlest chapter. Behind the caravan rested deserts of shimmering sand, snow-covered mountains, fertile river valleys, and countless caravanserais, whose welcoming fires had sheltered generations of travelers. Ahead, the land gradually softened into the ancient landscapes of the Levant, where rolling hills descended patiently toward the western sea. The journey was no longer one of difficult ascent or uncertain passage. It had become a quiet procession toward completion, guided by the same steady rhythm that had carried merchants, camels, and precious cargo across thousands of miles of Asia. The valleys grew greener with every passing day. Terraced hillsides embraced ancient olive groves, whose silver leaves stirred gently beneath the evening breeze. Vineyards climbed sunlit slopes, while scattered orchards stretched toward villages built from pale limestone that reflected the warm light of the descending sun. Here, the Silk Road entered lands where eastern caravans met the great maritime routes of the Mediterranean, allowing goods that had crossed continents unpatient camelbacks to continue their remarkable journey aboard ships, sailing toward distant Roman ports. The air itself seemed to change with every mile, warm currents drifting through. The hills carried the delicate fragrance of damask roses blooming in carefully tended gardens. Nearby workshops released the faint resinous aroma of dried myrrh, treasured for centuries in temples, homes, and marketplaces alike. From cedar forests growing upon distant mountain ridges came another familiar scent, rich, calm, and enduring, carried gently upon the evening wind, until it blended naturally with every other fragrance of the land. Each breath seemed to contain the memory of civilizations whose histories had unfolded side by side through countless generations of peaceful exchange. Then, almost imperceptibly, another fragrance appeared, one unlike anything encountered throughout the long journey across the continent. It arrived quietly, carried upon cool air flowing inland after sunset. There was freshness within it, a faint taste of salt, and an immense sense of open distance. Before the travelers ever caught sight of the horizon itself, they understood that the sea lay waiting beyond the next gentle rise. For many among the caravan, it was the first meeting with the great Mediterranean, whose waters linked the Eastern world to the cities of Greece, Egypt, and Rome. As twilight deepened, the caravan reached a peaceful coastal harbor where stone quays extended calmly into dark, gently moving water. Lanterns glowed softly along the docks, reflecting long ribbons of golden light across the quiet surface of the sea. Merchant vessels rested securely at anchor, their masts rising silently against a sky already filling with familiar stars. Their sails remained carefully furled, waiting patiently for favorable winds that would soon carry another chapter of the Silk Road. Far across the Mediterranean, within spacious warehouses built beside the harbor, the final work of the journey unfolded without haste. Heavy crates filled with carefully woven silk, protected through deserts, mountains, and countless changing climates, were gently lowered from the camels' backs and stacked with practiced care upon cool stone floors. Bundles of fragrant tea, precious spices, lacquerware, fine ceramics, and countless other treasures found their places beside them, awaiting the Roman merchants and sailors who would continue their passage across the sea. The long chain of exchange remained unbroken. No single traveler had carried every treasure from beginning to end. Yet together, through quiet cooperation extending across continents, the road fulfilled its purpose once more. Outside, the faithful camels stood patiently as their harnesses were loosened for the final time. One by one, the bronze bells that had accompanied every careful step from the distant east were gently removed. For thousands of miles, their soft chimes had echoed through deserts, mountains, fertile valleys, and ancient cities, marking each day with unwavering regularity. Now they rested quietly beside folded saddles. Their long music had come to its peaceful conclusion, and at last they fell completely silent. The merchants lingered only briefly upon the harbored before seeking their well-earned rest. There was little need for conversation. The journey itself had spoken through every mile it had patiently unfolded. Some gazed across the moonlit water where distant ships rocked gently upon slow waves. Others simply closed their eyes for a moment, listening to the calm breathing of their animals and feeling the quiet satisfaction known only to those who have completed a truly long road. Beyond the harbor walls, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly beneath the stars, its surface rising and falling with effortless rhythm. Gentle waves reached the ancient stone quays in steady succession, touching them with soft whispers before quietly retreating once again. The sound repeated without interruption, peaceful, unhurried, eternal, as it had through centuries before the caravan arrived, and, as it would, continue long after every traveler had fallen asleep, wrapped in comfortable blankets within quiet rooms overlooking the sea. The merchants surrendered to deep and restful sleep, while the camels rested peacefully nearby after their extraordinary journey across Asia. Outside, the stars shone softly above the silent harbor, and the waves continued their patient conversation with the ancient stones, growing quieter and quieter until only the gentle rhythm of the sea remained, carrying the story of the Silk Road peacefully into the stillness of the night.